Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Barbara McClintock, who has written or illustrated over 40 books. She's an award-winning author, illustrator, and I'm going to let you explain exactly what it is that you do.
Well, I illustrate. I'm primarily an illustrator, I have to admit. I have always drawn. My very first memory is of lying on the kitchen floor in my stomach with a crayon in each hand, drawing gigantic circles. And I have that has just been my first and natural language. But everything I drew was very animated. If I drew a cat, the cat was dancing and singing and, kind of very, very playful, kind of a cartoonist at heart, I guess. And
Mhm.
when I first started my career, I was given manuscripts to illustrate. And at a certain point, I thought, I've got stories to tell. And I would really, really like to be part of the whole package of writing and illustrating. So I have done quite a few of my own books. I have yet to write a manuscript that somebody else illustrates. Maybe that will happen someday. But I love having that back and forth play of the written text and narrative illustration. That's the beauty of the art form of picture books. The text, the written text is actually translated by the illustrator to show and give momentum to the story itself, in the drawings as well as in the written words. So,
Well, your
I guess that's
your illustrations are so beautiful. I wouldn't want anybody else to do illustrations.
well, editors have told me that too, but someday, I think it would be fun to do or
No.
collaborate with someone. That would be great.
So, so what what draws you to this particular genre that and style that you create, and what do you think draws customers to these kinds of works?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've been doing this for a long time. And when I first started illustrating and writing books, my first book was a 48-page wordless picture book based on a story by Balzac using 18th century steel engraving techniques for very detailed pen and ink work. And I think that the unifying thing over the years, because the last book that I wrote and illustrated, a book called Room, was done with markers, broad tip markers, and very bright, vibrant colors. But the unifying thing is that overall, I like to have fun and I like to show the joy and exuberance of the human spirit and just investigate what people are all about. So I guess that I'm just drawn to a specific genre or artistic style or thing that I'm writing about, just out of curiosity, what makes people tick? And children especially. That's the big question. And what attracts people to my books, I think some people, maybe my most popular book or some of my most popular books, one was The Gingerbread Man that came out a
Mhm.
very long time ago and it's still in print. And I think it's just about a mischievous cookie. And who doesn't love somebody who's mischievous and full of life? And my book, Adele and Simon, which was based in Paris, it's sort of like a dressed up version of Where's Waldo, taking place in Paris just before the First World War. Girl picks her younger brother up after school, and they walk home through Paris, and he loses something in every picture. So it was just my love song to Paris, and it made people have to look at all of these drawings of the Luxembourg Gardens or the Louvre or various places that you can still visit in Paris. So I think people who traveled during the pandemic or couldn't travel during the pandemic really loved that book. They could kind of go to Paris without leaving their living room sofa.
Oh, I like that idea. That's great. So, what is the last thing that you worked on?
The last thing that I worked on that came out in November is
Ah, yes.
Foolery.
Yes.
And this was just a joy and a pleasure to illustrate. The author, Michelle Markel, wrote a text to match the exuberance of Randolph Caldecott's drawing style. Randolph Caldecott was a lot like me. He loved doing very funny characters that were full of mischief and very exuberant drawings of things. And Michelle really picks that up in her in the way that she writes the story and the wordplay, and it's just marvelous. So this was a lot of fun to illustrate. Randolph and I have other things in common. We are both self-taught. I did not go to art school. I learned how to draw by going to public libraries and checking out books, or going to bookstores and buying books that I
Wow.
really liked, and just studying the artwork or the writing in all of those books. And it all blended together eventually into a style. And that's kind of what Randolph did as well.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
yeah, so I've loved his work ever since I was starting out as an illustrator. He was a real mentor and inspiration to me. So I can't say enough good things about Randolph Caldecott. So
Can we see
there's,
if,
oh, go ahead. I'm
oh,
sorry.
sorry. Oh, yeah, I was going to ask if we could see a few more pictures from the book.
Oh, absolutely. So I think one that, so this was when I talked to the book is published by Chronicle Books. My editor, Melissa Manlove, uh, asked me if I would incorporate some of my drawings blend them with some of Randolph Caldecott's drawings.
Ah,
So that's kind of what I did. I tried to pick up some of the exuberance and some of the things that Randolph himself drew. So this is an example of Michelle Markel's engaging text. It says, "Come on in. A whole world lives and breathes inside these pages. You'll find frisky animals, sprightly characters, and a hero so chipper he can barely hold still on the paper." And I wanted to when you read this sentence, it's kind of like, how do I even illustrate this? So I came up with a conceptual approach where I'm actually playing on that come on in, where there's a book opening up, and here's Randolph pulling back the pages, and all of these characters that appear in some of his stories are spilling out onto the page. So it's just an invitation to enter the book. And also, there was a wonderful art director at Chronicle. Her name is Jennifer Tolo Pierce, and she decided that she would continue that visual narration of the text by highlighting certain words, making them larger, putting them in a different type font or a different color. So it adds more zip and punch to the story as you read
hmm.
along. So it just, oh, I can't say enough good things about this book. I really love it. So this is talks about, and I'll read this. I'll read just a couple more pages. Uh,
Okay.
but in the 1850s, there are no children's books like this one. Many are published, but their pictures look stiff, full of pretty poses and cluttered scenery. No one has yet imagined how much fun an illustrated book could be. No one until, quick, if you don't move fast, you're going to miss him. Randolph Caldecott, future famous illustrator. A fever has weakened his heart and left him frail, but he loves to be outdoors. So this is really great because the big contribution that Randolph has made to illustrating picture books, and why the medal is named after him, is that he broke this tradition of illustrations just being garnish or decoration on really pretty staid text. And he just opened things up and everything became playful, and the illustrations definitely became a translation and a parallel play with with the text that was going on. So anyway, I'll just show you one more quick picture. And this is Randolph with his, he loved animals. So he's walking through these animals, and here he is at home, inspired by the animals that he has observed, and they're flying off the paper and up into the air, demonstrating his imagination and his talent for drawing. So it's just this, I just love this book so much. It's just really great. So I hope anybody else picking it up will enjoy it as half as much as I do, because it's just and the funny thing is, Randolph Caldecott was such an interesting character. Both Michelle Markel and I developed a bit of a crush on him. So don't tell my husband. So anyway, that's Tomfoolery, my latest.
Did you get a chance to work, excuse me, work with Michelle?
Well, that is the interesting thing about picture books. Very, very rarely do the author and illustrator even
Right.
meet or have any kind of communication. The editor wants to act as the traffic cop.
Mm-hmm.
And if Michelle had something that she wanted to comment on with the drawings, it would come through the editor, and vice versa, because the editor really wants the illustrator to find their own narration, their own interpretation of the text. So I think when people have been working together for a while, authors and illustrators, that sort of melts away and they can collaborate. But yeah, it's kind of a secret of the industry that Michelle, that authors and illustrators don't meet. Michelle and I met after the book came out.
Ah, okay.
And I adore her. She's wonderful. So I'm glad that we are friends, but did not happen before this came out.
That's what I figured. I just was checking on that. Okay. Um, so uh what media did you use for the pictures? I mean, how do you get from start to finish in the book?
Well, that is so this book was done on tracing paper. I have a light box in my studio, and it's a flat sheet of glass that has LED lights inside of it. So when you turn it on, you can see through layers of paper. So you can trace on top of it. It's a little like if you're at a window and you put a piece of paper up on a window with light coming through and another
Mm-hmm.
piece on top of it, you can see whatever is printed or drawn on the sheet of paper that's directly against the window pane glass. So that's the kind of thinking behind that. So I trace and I trace and I do layers and layers. And I actually have, I have some examples of some of my sketches that I think if we want to talk about the cover in a little bit, I can
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate, show. But
Yeah.
once I have the sketches in place, I send those images of those, either that I take with a camera or on a scanner, to the editor and the art director, and they make comments. There might be some things they want changed, and Michelle saw a lot of them, I believe. And then I finish the sketches, make them very tight. They're done with just a pencil like this. And once those are done, then I take a sheet of watercolor paper, put it on top of the sketch on that light box, and then I trace the image from the sketch onto the watercolor paper. So, and I used to use a very old-fashioned steel nib on a pen and dip it into Indian ink, but I got tired of that. So now I just use a Faber-Castell little pen with a
Mm.
nib, and I just draw with that. And then once the ink drawing or the drawing with the marker is done, then I get out watercolors and I use watercolors to produce the color in all of the pictures. And once that's done, once all of that is done, I package it up and I send it to the publisher. In this, if the publisher is in New York City, I can just hop in my car and go into the city and deliver the work. But Chronicle is in San Francisco. So tempting as it was to jump on an airplane and go to San Francisco, I just couldn't do that. So I mailed it all to the West Coast and they scanned the artwork and were able to, turn it into a digital file and do all of the design work and the type and everything. And then they did all of that magic of printing the book and having it bound and putting it in a box and sending it around to bookstores. And I got a box on my doorstep, which was so exciting. The books. So that's in a nutshell. That's a really quick rundown of the
Oh,
process.
that's perfect. So you actually send in the paintings to the publisher.
Yes. Yes.
Ah.
So they have to have the artwork reproduced by, I don't know what kind of device. I think that's in some cases a printer will use a drum, a clear plastic drum, and they wrap the finished artwork around the drum, and then a camera scans it so that they get a
Hmm.
very, very clear image of that finished artwork that I had done. And it's pretty close to the color and the weight of the line, all of that sort of thing. And it doesn't show all the little bumps and imperfections and cat hairs that I get on my artwork. So that's been good too. In fact, I think a cat just walked in the room. I'm gonna have to move things over here. Sorry. Um, I know what's gonna happen next. So that's,
Yes.
yeah, so I don't try to make duplications of my finished artwork. I just don't have the sophisticated uh devices that are needed to do that.
Hmm. Okay.
So
Now,
so this is Tia. Hello. Tia's here. She helps. She's my studio assistant.
I see. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Um, so tell me about the cover.
So the cover is the most important element of the book, actually, because the cover really, it's what greets people. The minute they walk in a bookstore, they see a book and they have to, within seconds, read the cover, and the cover tells them about the content of the book, tells them a bit about what the story is, who the characters are, and you have to pack a lot of information into a cover so that it just reads within maybe 8 or 10 seconds as somebody comes in. And it also has to compete with, dozens of other book covers that are also facing out. So a book cover it's really the introduction and the draw to bring somebody over to a book, to get them to pick it off the shelf and start going through the book. And it's an art form in and of itself. And it is also something that is the most uh granular, like the detail that the art director and the editor and the marketing people and the publicists, everybody is on the cover because they really want it to have that kind of star power that,
Mhm. Do you think it sells the books?
oh yes, oh
Okay,
absolutely.
that's what
I
I
think
thought
that,
too.
yeah, I've bought books just based on the cover. Yeah, I
Yep.
can walk to a bookstore and I see something and I'm just drawn to it. I can see it like way across a room and I want to go up and pick up that book. And sometimes I've even purchased books that I like the cover and I'm not as thrilled with the what the interior artwork looks like, but I
Hmm.
buy it because I love the cover so much. So usually that doesn't happen, it just, yeah, it just sparks curiosity about and gets you kind of going on whatever is behind that cover when you open up the book.
Mhm. So tell me about your cover of
So
Tomfoolery.
yeah, so my cover, everything is going along pretty smoothly with all the interior work, and there might have been a couple of little comments, but people were all basically happy. And so my team and people think that maybe an author or an illustrator just sits down and writes a book or does the artwork and sends it to the publisher, and they're like, fine, we'll publish this. But everything is a team effort. So the editor and the art director are really intimately involved with every step of the process of creating the art director, not so much the text, but certainly with the illustration and they and it's great having somebody like in your corner, right at your elbow, you know, kind of
Mhm.
collaborating with you on things. So things were fine with everything inside, but as soon as you hit the cover, all of a sudden it goes on and on. It's just like goes off the planet. Everybody's like weighing in and saying, geez, I don't know. We've got to really think about this. So this was my first cover sketch idea. And I wanted to show tomfoolery, like Randolph Caldecott, almost like P.T. Barnum or something. He's like bigger than life, and this really captures, I thought, who he was. Just, you know, this kind of magical, like I can do all this stuff. And then around him are all these little details of some of his drawings. So here is someone riding on a horse, and we've got a milkmaid dancing with a cow and galloping horses. He loved horses. So these are all tiny little elements, almost like leaves falling around him. And my editor got back in touch with me and said, this is nice, but this is not it. We have to keep going. So I thought, okay, so we wanted to have more elements. So I thought, okay, we'll show him drawing. We wanted to see him in action. So this is Randolph drawing. And you also have to think about what's going to happen with the type, because this becomes a very, very, very prominent feature in any kind of illustration, any kind of cover design is the type font, the lighting on the type, the color of the type, all this sort of thing. So we were playing around with that. So again, I utilized a lot of these little characters that appear in Randolph's work, and then Randolph sitting and sketching. So we know that he's an artist now because you see him sketching. You can see what he's drawing, and then you see the title right away. And they said, no, this isn't quite it. We can't, these things are too little. These little details get lost. So we can't have that. We want something else. We want to show something also that's more contemporary that you know, children now living in the 21st century would be able to really respond to. So I went back to the drawing board and I started drawing, and there was this kind of, some people wanted lots of activity and lots of motion. So we've got a horse jumping over a fence with a book in its mouth, and a little kid sitting on the back of the horse reading, and kids dancing, and a dog stealing a book, and all of this stuff happening. And this went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and around with the editor, the art director, the marketing people. It was sort of like, I don't know, this is a little complicated to read, and I don't think that this is it yet. So it took a month at least to finally come up with the final sketch. And this is the final sketch where Randolph is drawing. So you see that he's an artist, but you see how children are responding to his work. And in this case, a dog, a cat, a duck, and another dog, and a chicken. And it's easier to read. There are fewer elements. So if you're looking at something, if you have to, so people read pictures just like they read words. You have to see certain elements, and the simpler a sentence, the simpler a drawing, the fewer elements there are in it, the more quickly you will read it and take in information about what the book cover is about. So we finally everybody agreed on this image with contemporary children circling around Randolph, who is having the time of his life making drawings. And we then had to decide on the background. And at a certain point, the art director said, why don't we just leave it white?
Mm-hmm.
And it is so powerful that way. And it really plays on, Randolph loved doing vignettes that were printed on white paper. So
Yeah.
it's contemporary, but it also refers back to the drawings Randolph was doing in the 1870s and early 80s. So it's there are a lot going on here, but packed into a very simple image. And yeah, so that was it. That's the story of
That's
the cover.
amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest challenge that you had in putting that out?
The entire book,
Yeah,
arriving on the cover specifically, or the whole book?
the whole book.
Um, it was really finding a way to show Randolph's the trying to take someone who lived in the late 1800s and make him relevant to, a 5-year-old sitting or a 4-year-old sitting on your lap today. So what do you do? How do you bring that life into something? Because he's wearing clothing that he wore at that time. So so that dates it. I think so I really, really tried to make Randolph in the drawings look like just sort of reach out of himself and form a connection with anybody looking at these pictures. You see that he is struggling with some of his work. You see that he is doing things that I think especially any child who is doing something that's a little different than what everybody else around him
Hmm.
or her or they are doing. Um, and in this case, Randolph worked as a bank clerk for a while, and he doodled donkeys in the in the margins of the math sheets, the papers that he was working on. And so I wanted to show him doing that, and some of his fellow workers looking at all of these things coming to life. But I wanted to show in the expressions on everybody's faces and the way that they're standing, their gestures. I wanted that to relate to, you could be sitting like in an office today doing something goofy on the computer and have people standing around you and as interested and fascinated. So wanted to look beyond the costumes and even the gender of the individual and find a way to make it universal. That's the trick. When you're writing, when you're illustrating, you find something that is universal in whatever subject you're dealing with.
Right, right. So, um, how much research did you have to do for the illustrations?
A lot, because
Mm,
this was somebody who actually, lived. I couldn't make
hmm.
things up about
Right.
him. And I started working on this just as the pandemic hit. So I couldn't fly over to London and do research. London is where Randolph Caldecott lived and the surrounding countryside before and after his career. And so I had to go online, and thank goodness there was a lot of information online about him. Uh, I also happen to have a lot of books. I'm going to take you over to my bookcase just for a second here. Um, so because I love Randolph Caldecott so much, in years past when I've gone to London, I have collected a lot of his books. So these are some original editions. There goes one of them on the floor
Um,
of his books. So this was, um, very helpful to find some of these drawings and this book, which I'm going to have to reassemble. So this was a huge help because I have things that are pretty rare and hard to find, but very, very helpful when I was working on developing the drawings. And then I had to do things like there's a scene that takes place. I wanted to identify that Randolph Caldecott was in London. So I wanted to portray the Tower of Big Ben
yeah.
and Westminster Bridge. And I discovered so I had to find out. So he moves to London in 1878, I think. I had to make sure that these lamps, these were installed across the river from Big Ben, the year that Randolph moved to London. So I had to be
Oh,
very specific about that. Also, Big Ben was built just not like within less than a decade of when Randolph moved to London. So there were
wow.
all these things, elements that were there. And I also wanted to show the diversity that existed in London at that time. So I did a lot of research. I read books about uh, the Black Victorian experience, individuals of color who lived in London at that time, and some very fascinating characters and interesting people to read about. So there were also some African Americans who were living in London at that time. So
Mm.
all of these people are based on people who actually existed and were living in London then, through photographs, through written documentation. There was a large Southeast Asian population. There were a lot of students who were going to Oxford and Cambridge. So I found a lot of photographs of Southeast Asian students. There were East Asians in London as well. London was a hub of trade. So ships were coming from all around the world. People from everywhere were kind of blending into what was going on in London. There were cultural differences, but there was a lot of poverty in London at that time. So this is a character. These are characters who I found in illustrations from London at that time who were just very ragtag, and selling things like flypaper or playing musical instruments, street musicians. And these were legislators, I'm sorry, who were so it's just this hodgepodge. So the research alone for this book took almost a year.
Wow.
A lot, because I wanted every detail to be accurate. So that's just me, but I really felt that it was important to do that for this book. But I wanted it to look like, if you look at this book and you go through it, it's effortless. And I don't want I don't want it
Hmm.
to look like it was like a didactic struggle to, kind of get all this information. I just want it to be in the background and it's there and it's just like the warm glow of good research. I guess
Right.
that's what
Well,
I
it
want.
is. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Oh gosh. Well, I have some interesting things that I'm working on. I have a book that I can't really talk about at this point, but it
Hmm.
will be coming out. I'm just working on the finished art. It will probably be coming out sometime next year, so stay tuned about that. It's a picture book.
Okay.
Um, but I am also working on a graphic novel for Roaring Brook Press. And
Oh,
this is a real departure for me. It is really aimed as a middle grade YA book, and it's about a French curator named Rose Valland who lived in Paris during the Second World War, and it is about the Nazis confiscating artwork from museums, private collections, and in Paris, but they did this all over Europe, Western and Eastern Europe and Russia. So it is, so the research for this has been really interesting. And I just, over the holidays, my son was visiting and I would come downstairs because part of, doing research about, like Hitler's suicide and Goring and, the rape of Europa and all of these things. And I come downstairs in the morning and my son would say, "Hi, Mom, how are you?" And I just burst into tears. I mean, it's really, really been an interesting interesting thing to work on. So it's written by a young author named Kirsten Larson, and Emily Feinberg is the editor. And I just got all the sketches in, so now they're going through it and figuring out what's what with all of that. And I'll probably hear back from them in a month or two. And so then I move forward with that. And then I have another book that I just signed up with, Little Brown, and that one is about the Ratzels and the Catzels. And the Ratzels, they live in neighboring castles, and they are arch enemies. And it's about war. I mean, these two projects are not tapping into my cheerful, lighthearted nature, but they're interesting. And the Ratzels and the Catzels, the old establishments, want to go to war with each other, but the young prince and the young princess in each of these castles decide, they meet. It's a little like Romeo and Juliet, but without
right.
the
I was thinking that.
romance. And they realize that they have more in common than not, and they put a stop to, and this is a spoiler alert, so they stop everything that was going on with all of their aged advisors and everybody wanting to go to war. And it's beautiful. It is a really beautiful book. So that's Little Brown, and my editor is Deirdre Jones on this project. So looking forward to diving into that.
Ah, wow. Those sound like great projects. Keeping busy, I see.
Yes, and I also am teaching at Wesleyan University. I'm teaching a course in creating children's books, and that has been a real pleasure. I do school talks. I travel all around the country, in fact, other all around the world, speaking in elementary schools. So this was speaking to college students, and as my husband puts it, yes, college students are somewhere between kindergartners and professionals. So don't worry, when you're talking to them, you'll be fine. So that's another thing that I'm doing. So yes, I do manage to get a little sleep every night, but yeah, it's good. I'm very lucky. Very, very lucky.
That's great. Now I have questions for you about being an artist author. Okay. What's your favorite part? What's the favorite part about being an artist author? About the whole, you know, about the whole project, the whole thing.
Well, I think so I did a book a few years ago called Vroom. And let's see, did I set a copy of that out? I did not. I Anyway, it's about a little girl in a sports car.
Yep.
And what I loved about it was that I came up with, you get to originate a concept, you get to find something that is so authentic to yourself and talk about it, both in the story and in the pictures. So I had a new editor who came up to visit me in my studio, and I have an Audi TT sports car, which I absolutely love. And he saw it in the driveway and he said, came into the house and he said, "I want you to do a book about a girl in a sports car and based on that car." So I signed a contract, and that was so exciting, but then I had to come up with a story. And I at first thought it would be a concept book, and then it developed into something more than that. But it is really totally about me. I think everyone, every author, every illustrator is drawing themselves in some way. You have to imbue whatever it is you're doing with things that you find inside yourself. That, again, going back to the idea that you have components in yourself that are universal, that we all have. So that's the trick. And if you're writing, there's a fluidity between the text and the story. The story told through the text and the story told through the pictures. So it's like show, don't tell. You can push back and forth. And that lyrical dance is really fun. I really enjoy doing that. So I hope that answers the question. Is that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, I think so. So
okay?
what's been your favorite adventure during your writing and illustration career?
Um, well, I've had a long and varied career. Early on, I worked for Jim Henson, designing drawing characters from his Fraggle Rock series, which took place a long time ago. So that was an adventure. I would say every book is its own trip, it's its own journey, and finding all of them has been, kind of elements of them. And I like to dive in and really explore, and I love doing research. So everyone is fun. I think my biggest adventure relating to my career, maybe not a specific book, was when I went to college. I the second half of my growing up was in North Dakota,
Mhm.
and I went to college in a small college a few blocks from my parents' house in Jamestown, North Dakota. And while I
Mhm.
was there, I knew I wanted to write and illustrate children's books, but at that time, especially, there were no courses offered in how to write children's books, anything about children's literature, about illustrating children's books. Um, and this was a long time ago. In the Night Kitchen had just come out, and
Mhm.
I loved Maurice Sendak's work. I read about him there was an interview with him in Time magazine to celebrate the book coming out. And I read that he lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And I thought, oh, Maurice Sendak, he could tell me how to write and illustrate books. I think I'll call him. So this is the beauty of growing up in a place like North Dakota, where you're just sort of like a, I don't know, an innocent.
In the
And
middle of
I
nowhere.
In the middle of nowhere, exactly. So I called Ridgefield Information. His number was listed. And so I called him and dialed the number, and I thought, how wrong can this go? He'll either be really nice and he'll tell me what I want to know, or he'll hang up. So, like, it's a no-brainer. So he answered the phone, and I said, I'm from North Dakota. I'm a student. You don't know who I am, but I want to write and illustrate children's books, and can you help me? And he was wonderful. He talked to me for 20 minutes. He told me how to put together a portfolio. He told me how to uh, pick a well-known folk or fairy tale and do a dummy book based on it, and do 2 or 3 pieces of finished art to show how I would, handle the illustrations. He told me to move to New York. And I said, okay, I'll move to New York. And I said, should I go to art school? And he said, no, absolutely not. It'll put so much garbage in your head. It'll take you 10 years to get rid of it. So he said, okay, I won't go to art school. And um, I read that he taught himself a lot about illustration by going to public libraries. So that's where the teaching myself through going to libraries began. And once I moved to New York, which is a whole other story that I won't go into at this point, but um, I had museums too. So I sketched a lot. I went to libraries. I started meeting other people who were involved in writing and illustrating books. And at that point, you could call, the editor-in-chief at Harper and Row by just going through the yellow pages and dialing the children's book department number. So I started at a good time, and that was quite an adventure. That was really
Wow,
something.
that is an adventure. I don't think you could do that nowadays. I
No,
don't know.
no, no, unfortunately not. Yeah,
Yeah, you were very lucky to be able to do that.
I was.
But
Yeah.
are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that might have helped you with your career?
Absolutely. There is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators,
Yes. Yes.
SCBWI, and I absolutely recommend to anybody who is, no matter what stage you are as in your becoming an author, if you're a well-established author, the same thing with being an illustrator, join. It is such a wonderful organization. A lot of really wonderful people have gotten their start by going to workshops and lectures and getting involved with the Society of Children's Book. I have to have a sip of tea. I'm sorry. But yeah, that is number one. And then there's other places. There's Highlights. It's an organization that has a camp in Eastern Pennsylvania, and you can apply for scholarships to go there, and you can go for a long weekend or a week and have workshops with well-established authors and illustrators. So that's worth looking into as well. But I would say SEBWI is probably the place to go.
Okay, great. That sounds excellent. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned during your writing and illustration career thus far?
Um, have lots of cats in yours. Do we have cats around? I think just not to give up, because, especially when you're starting out, and even now in my stage of my career, there's a lot of rejection. You might send a story out time and time and time again. It took me 8 years to sell my first
Wow.
book, and it was rejected by 15 publishers. The 16th, David Godine, published it, and it went on to win my first New York Times Best Illustrated Books Award.
Wow.
But it took a lot of tenacity. So just don't give up. Don't lose confidence in yourself. Just keep going. That's, I think, the most important thing.
Okay. And do you have any other pieces of advice? Or is
Uh,
that pretty much it?
that's kind of it. I think if you've got that in your back pocket, you're going to be fine.
Okay, that's great. Now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't know about you?
Well, I'm left-handed. I draw with my left hand, but I hold scissors or cut or play tennis or anything, or play the violin with my right hand. And I did play the violin when I was in school, in college. I was really torn between a music career or a career in illustration. And I was a much better author illustrator. Oh, look at this. Oh, look, Pia. Look.
This is my calico.
Oh,
You see the kitty?
oh. So that's kind of it. I'm ambidextrous, and that's kind of a surprise, I guess, for people.
Okay. Um, my next question is, what question do you wish interviewers would ask? And what would your answer be?
Well, I wish interviewers would ask me if I'd ever wanted to be a cat. And the answer to that question is yes. When I was little, I wanted to be a cat when I grew up, and it just didn't work out. So I was really glad I had art and writing as a backup plan.
You were never able to be a cat.
No, no,
Not even
sad.
Halloween, huh?
Yeah. Oh, Halloween, I had cat costumes. Yes, so I could do it. But a real honest to goodness cat, that was, unfortunately not in the cards for me.
I see. Oh, that's too bad.
I know if we could all be cats.
I
So
know. Wouldn't that be
so
nice?
my cats are my alter ego, I guess.
Yeah.
They're doing the heavy lifting for me in the whole cat area. Yeah.
Okay. So what is or are your passions when you're not working? And how do you make time to do the things that you love?
That's really a challenge. I I love sewing. My mom was a textile and design major in college. So she sewed a lot of the clothing for my sister and me when we were growing up. So I used to sew quite a bit. And that has kind of fallen by the wayside, but I still like looking at books about patterns and fabric and fashion and that sort of thing, because it's just kind of intriguing to me. And because I am sitting almost round the clock when I'm working on books, especially at a deadline, it's become important to me to walk and to do yoga and to do things to move around. So I just don't become like a pile of pudding or something in my chair. And I've found that I really enjoy it. So that's become kind of a hobby of mine as well.
Uh-huh. Okay. But how do you find time to do all the things that you love?
Um, it's not easy, and there isn't when I'm really, really busy, like when I'm on a deadline, everything else just goes by the wayside, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So that's so sometimes I succeed in finding the time and sometimes I don't. It just is
Yep.
kind of, but I keep going back to things. Once I finish a big project, then I go back and I'm stretching and working my way back up to downward dog again and, taking long walks. So that's kind of it.
Okay. Now, what does your studio space look like? And what do you need to have around you when you're writing or doing your artwork?
Well, I have to have things that I absolutely love. So I am going to take you on a little studio tour here. And
Great.
um, so I love books. So I have books of just all kinds of books. Some of these books were books that my grandparents had had. There are a lot of contemporary books. I have books by author illustrator friends of mine. And here is a prop, this little pedal car that I used in the book Vroom for inspiration. And here is my chair that I sit in while I'm reading. And I have sketchbooks, other books that are influential to me and inspiring to me, and um, little picture frames. And then these are just toys and puppets and stuff that I have that I find inspiring. This is my cabinet of all kinds of delights, and I have things in here that um, so my translator who translates my books into Japanese sent me this. It's just a little carved cat. I love
Yep.
cats. I
Cats.
get a lot of things. And I have puppets, and this is going to creep everybody out. This is a dried duck foot. I have like, and Judy Schachner is a friend of mine, so I have this wonderful accordion kitty of hers that I can take out and play with. So just all kinds of and books and papers, and it's pretty much a mess in here. So this is an ink drawing of a bird that my son created. He lived in China for a while, so when I was in Hong Kong visiting him, I was able to get a couple of little elements. And then I have a window looking out on this beautiful garden. My husband David is an avid rose gardener. So in June, this whole backyard is just full of roses. It's just really gorgeous. And of course, stuff here. And this is a fireplace. So the heat is going because I live in an old drafty house. More books. A friend of mine just sent me this little race car with a cat in it. And this is a buffalo head from a bookstore in Jamestown, North Dakota. And, just this is my board where I keep kind of a flow chart of things that I'm working on with dates and delivery dates and how far along I want to be in a certain project at a certain time. Yeah, that's kind of it. And here's my drawing board and Pia on my drawing board. So that's kind of my chaos.
Uh-huh.
Chaos in my studio. So that's kind of it. That's what I have in my studio.
And when you're writing or illustrating, do you need to have any special food or drink? I noticed you had tea.
I love tea. Yeah, it's good to have tea. Sometimes I have grapes and sometimes I have ginger snaps.
Ah,
I love ginger snaps.
okay. And when you're working, do you prefer music or silence? Or if you prefer music, what kind?
Well, I love Baroque ensemble pieces.
Mhm.
Glenn Gould's playing the Goldberg variations. I love him specifically playing those pieces. So I have a love of classical music, but I also like jazz and I also like Celtic music
Yeah.
and I do like some rock and roll as well. So depends on what I'm doing. Like sometimes I need something that is very soothing and quieting and will kind of distract me a little bit, lift me off of the work I'm involved with. So
Mhm.
it just depends on sort of what I'm doing. As I'm coloring, I can listen to audible books, books on tape, that sort of thing, podcasts. But that's a little more involved. So I really can't be drawing faces and trying to articulate a gesture or get into something that's quite specific. It has to be just sitting and coloring and coloring and coloring and listening to, just whatever. I just have a big audible book library that I like to
Mhm.
do.
So the music, does it have lyrics or not?
Some some music does. It depends again on what I'm doing.
Oh, okay.
So I cannot have lyrics or spoken words when I'm like drawing a face and I'm trying to project myself into that face or faces because it's too distracting. It's leading
Okay.
me somewhere else. So I have to be really right there. And then once that's all done, then I can do anything I want. So
Okay. My
sometimes
next
I
question,
watch things on Netflix while I'm coloring. So
right.
that's how distracted I can be when I'm doing that.
That would be very distracting. Yes.
Yes.
My next question, I know the answer, part of the answer to, um, is that writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any? And I know you do. And do they help or hinder you?
Well, when they're sleeping and behaving themselves, they definitely help. But when they're awake, and if I don't put like paints away at night, like I've gotten up in the morning and found little blue paw prints going across artwork. So I learned the
Oh,
hard way to put things away.
no.
Um, so yes, it just depends. It depends on how, if they want to be fed and then they come in and they're really obnoxious. And then once they've eaten, they go to sleep and they're fine.
Okay. I just have two more questions for you. One is, where can people find your work? Aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and in every video I give a plug to Annie's, you can you can get Barbara's work at Annie's if you call us at sorry, at 508-796-5613, Or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your work?
Oh, I would go to you first.
Thank you.
It's like their books are all over the place, but I want people to go to your bookstore. That's what I
Oh,
want. So
well, thank you. It would be wonderful. And next question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
well, if you go to my website, barbaramcclintockbooks.com, there are links to my Facebook and my Instagram pages on the opening home site. So you can link into Facebook, you can link into Instagram, and I have lots of pictures of my cats, of my house, of all kinds of things. So definitely go there and have fun. And I try to make it as lively and entertaining and non-stressful as possible, anything I post. So see a lot.
That's wonderful. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions. It was really wonderful speaking with you.
Oh,
And hopefully we will see you sometime at our bookstore. So
I would love that. That would be great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on. And I have had so much fun. This has been really lovely. Thank you.
great. Well, thank you, Barbara McClintock. We appreciate your coming and joining me. Thanks.
Thank you.